look, she's brought her drink. I should go get, you want to go grab my coffee?
Be for everybody who's out there and can't see and will be like, it's been that kind of a week to start the morning off with whatever we're starting it off with.
So good morning. This is Kathy Lazwick. I'm Melissa Schwartz. You got two managing brokers here. Because what is going on this week around your office, Kathy? A little small thing.
Well, I'm on the phone a lot trying to collect people who don't realize they're running their own business and they need to pay their association
dues.
fees.
Yeah, that would be a good thing.
So
it's been lots of fun.
It's that time of year I turn into a bill collector. And thank you all who are here, because I know you guys all paid your bills. But you don't realize how much time that takes up. And unfortunately, it takes away from broker questions and things like that.
It does.
Just hit that reminder. Pay attention to when it comes out in December and pay it. Get it done. Get it done. Happens the same time every year, by the way.
Isn't that funny? It does. Every December, people are wondering why I've not been available for calls. It's because I've been calling all of you that have not paid your association dues. Yes, we still have them in our office. But actually, I was talking about what else is happening near your office.
Oh, you're no fun.
Go ahead.
All right, so she's going to go get her caffeine. So we have some more changes coming up, and I know that's your favorite thing is when things change. And on February 1st, which was Saturday, but the transaction desk, they have not been uploaded to SkySlope yet, but the new forms have come out.
And I got a couple of them in there. We can do that.
So these are the ones that are going to be, they've done away with the broker compensation form, the CAB form. People had kind of gotten away from using it anyway, and they deemed it to be too confusing. I honestly don't know what was so confusing about it, but we're going to go strictly to the seller compensation addendum.
We're going to switch because we're going to get to that in just a second. No, stay there. But what is happening near your office? Why are you over here?
My office. Why am I here? Oh, goodness. I'm here and I'll be over at the Scottsdale office because at my office, the Phoenix Open, the WM Waste Management Phoenix Open.
Trying to get to that office
is horrendous up there.
Yeah.
It is literally the largest event that takes place in the entire Phoenix Valley. And although Monday and Tuesday are not bad, I'll be up there this afternoon. Wednesday's the Pro-Am, it gets a little busier. Thursday and Friday, it's a zoo. So all of my agents have been warned to have their checks sent to them. Don't come to the office unless you need to. And don't go park at the office because if you don't have a parking pass, your car will be towed. So that's kind of an issue. But that's it. That's why I'm here.
So you get two of us here. And we're going to start actually with you have asked about the seller compensation addendum, which also changed in February.
Yeah.
Because the CAB form disappeared. And so you can see February, please look at the top right of your forms. You should be seeing that it says February of 2025. If you didn't realize, the forms do have dates on from AAR. I'm assuming the MLS Choice has dates on it, but I am not sure. So you'll notice the CAB has disappeared, the whole paragraph in there that normally talks about the compensation agreement between brokers, that it could be the or. But, one of the things I wanted to bring up on this, there are two things. One is, again, it must be an ascertainable amount. You can't put, I keep getting zeros on this because you're a friend of mine, so I don't want to charge you. I'm just going to charge the seller. So Kathy, what do I get if I put 0 on line 10?
Well, this is a seller compensation addendum, so this gets attached to the contract.
Yeah.
So this gets attached to the
wrong one.
Contract. So this line 10 for sale or for lease needs to be filled out.
Right, one or the other.
So this basically simplified. People were getting wrong, where it had, if you were getting something from a broker, people were getting that incorrect because they would put, you'd use the seller compensation addendum. You didn't have a CAB agreement and you put that you'd be receiving from the broker on the other side, which was line 16. Right. So there was confusion in that. So simplifying this form has made it very easy. But what are you requesting from the seller? when you turn in a contract for a purchase or for a lease, period.
So one of the things I've seen is that our agents say the seller wants to reject this document and they don't want to sign it. They're going to counter it. So they don't want to include it and they're just going to write in the contract what they're paying. And the problem with that is that it's really important that lines 17 through 19 are in here, because it very specifically says the buyer broker can be paid through third-party beneficiaries. So it's really, really important that this stays with the contract, because if in fact your buyer broker is for 3% and your SCA is only for 2.5%, you're getting paid by two different people, the buyer and the seller. And so you need to have that line in there. People are like, I'll just throw it out. Do you throw out the HOA addendum and not have your client sign it if you're countering it? No. Do you throw out the lead-based paint addendum because you don't like the information on it? I mean, yeah, it doesn't really make sense with that one, but it's an addendum. It needs to be included. Both parties need to sign it. You counter it just like you would counter any other addendum. Line 10 shall be, go ahead.
Yeah, line 10 shall become.
Right.
And if they don't want to pay whatever percentage you put down there, yeah, they can counter it that way. Just the same as if they, let's say you asked for, $5 and they came back and said, no, we're only going to pay you $1. Well, you can go back and counter, because the buyer's responsible for the other $4 and they may go back and say, no, I'm not going to pay that. And so they want to go back and counter again, because this is very much coming out of the buyer's pocket. And that's the thing you have to remember when you're talking to your buyer, because the assumption shouldn't be automatically you're going to take less because the seller's unwilling to pay it.
Right.
It's a negotiation just like any other. So you need to jump back in and stand up for what you've asked for. And if you are asking for $5 and they're giving you $1, then you need to go back. Now, may you settle for $4 and not have the seller pay it? Well, yes, but then you're doing addendum to the buyer broker agreement to change it so the buyer is aware that they're not going to make up that extra 1%. But don't do that until you've tried negotiating. You guys, if you're not willing to fight for yourself as a buyer's broker for the value that you provide, then you're giving away your money. Why? And this is what I always tell people. Why should I pay to help the seller sell their home? Right? Or why should I pay to be of service to someone? But you got to prove your value.
Well, and here's the other question. If in the past you were negotiating for your buyer for 2% in closing costs, when in the past did you just fold over when the seller comes back and says, we're only giving 1% in closing costs? Oh, okay. Like, or, oh, you know what, buyer, no, let me pay that 1% for you. Right? Would you say that? Wouldn't you look at all the options available? Right? So let's start with price. Right? It usually starts with price. Home is listed for 500,000 and your buyer wants to offer 400,000. Oh, you know what? There might be some objection to that, because then they want 3% in closing costs and 2% blah, blah, blah in this. It's like, well, hold on a minute. They want 5% and they're offering $100,000 less. So can't you negotiate something else here? Can we get that price up a little bit? What is going to be reasonable to the seller and make that work? You've got to think about what the ultimate net is to that seller. And you need to communicate that as a buyer broker to your buyer. The seller's going to look at this as a math problem, right? You're reducing the off the list price, and then you're asking for closing costs and compensation. Maybe you're looking at a home warranty, which, by the way, today is no longer the $350 that it used to be when I started. A home warranty for a home with a pool probably is no less than $700, $750, right? So, it's a big chunk of dollars there when you're starting to add all these things up. Okay. So anything else on that?
Just keep in mind that, like the compensation. So the buyer to pay your compensation out of pocket, they have to come up with that cash, right? If you raise the price and get the commission from the seller, the buyer's not coming out of that cash. They're not gonna pay that whatever percent over a 30-year period, because chances are they're not gonna be in the home for 30 years. But they're gonna be less inclined to care about the difference, which may add $2 to the payment, than they are to come in with 5 or 10 grand. So keep in mind the bottom line, not just for the seller, but what's the bottom line for the buyer? And we too often now have gotten away from, we're so scared of the interest rate, right? But what's the difference between this number and this number when it comes right down to the payment? And what's more comfortable for the buyer? Do you want to come in with extra cash? Or would you prefer just to pay an extra $10 a month? Right? So it's just as much a negotiation with the seller as it is with your buyer. Show them what that payment is going to be. Be in touch with your lender. Make sure they're giving you PITI, first of all, because once you identified the house, they should be able to come pretty close on all, except for the insurance. They should become pretty close with all of it.
Yeah, we're not going over insurance today. That would be a lot. So again, the removal of the compensation agreement between brokers. Here are the different forms. Because the CAB form was removed, they had to make edits to all of these. They did the same thing on all of them to make sure that that CAB reference was gone. So that's the seller compensation addendum, the residential listing contract ER to sell and rent, the residential exclusive agency instead of exclusive rights, the vacant land, the ER and EA for the vacant land, okay? All right, so the buyer broker employment agreements, this is what I was referencing before. There are 2 of those, right? Through AAR, there are 2 of them. The agreement to show property and the exclusive employment agreement. Now you got 2 brokers here, so I'm gonna ask you, which, Kathy, would you use if you were trying to do an agreement to show one address? Which of these forms would you use?
So it depends on your business model. Obviously, if you're a Zillow agent and you're running out to show a home,
Right.
okay, a lot of them do use the showing property form. I never ran out to show a home unless it was my own listing. Okay, so it really depends on your business model. But as a business person, and this is not new. Buyer broker agreement's been around for, I've been in business a long time, and I use buyer broker exclusive employment agreements in my business practice always, because it forces you to sit down and have a conversation with somebody, explain to them what you're doing. Now, granted, I used to carry books and walk up the hill 5 miles in the snow to get keys to show houses all the time. But, you know, it's faster, easier now to look up properties, look up comps, but there's a lot more information out there and it comes a lot faster, and we're required to do a lot more in that realm. That's still an explanation to the buyer. The problem is a lot of people started running out to show a house without any explanation of what they were doing. Therefore, the buyer broker agreements became less and less used. Okay. My opinion, you're working for somebody. My expectation is if I'm working for you, whether to go show a home or several homes, I want to be paid at the end of the day. Right? If they buy a home, I want to be paid. A showing agreement says, well, if I write the contract, I get paid. So I can run around showing homes to people that they can turn around and get their sister, who's a part-time agent who works during the day, to come over that evening and write a contract, and I would not get paid.
Oh, but I wrote it for that property. I wrote it specifically for that property. Don't I get paid?
No.
Yeah.
So unless you have that actual employment agreement, not getting paid.
Right? Does that make sense to everybody here? So it is okay to write the BBEEA for a property. Instead of saying Maricopa County or Maricopa and Pinal counties, or I've seen some people write all of Arizona, which is a little stretch, but that's fine. You can write 123 East Main Street. That agreement is specifically for that one property.
By the way, if you write all of Arizona, your buyer broker will never stand up in court. If you have to go after someone and you wrote down all of Arizona, I'm gonna tell you right now that they're gonna question that you're an expert in every single one of those areas. And the Arizona law states that you have to work within your area of expertise. Okay, now how do new agents, because obviously they have no area of expertise, but how do new agents get away with that? And that is simply because they have a mentor or a broker that is in direct supervision. And if I'm located in Scottsdale, Phoenix, Paradise Valley, and you go sell a property in Tucson, do I have the expertise in Tucson? No. Which means if you try to sue a buyer for buying down in Tucson and you work up here, good luck. Okay,
So make sure it's in the area that you want to cover. I don't recommend you do just Scottsdale, right? Because we all know Scottsdale Tempe border, Scottsdale Phoenix border. Does that mean the homes with the Scottsdale 85254 are actually, is that Scottsdale or is that Phoenix? Are you talking postal code? Or are you talking city? So I would, especially city wise, I would at least list a whole bunch of them. Or I would say Maricopa County.
Maricopa County is the easiest thing to write in.
So why would you put Pinal County? Has anybody done business outside of Gold Canyon, Apache Junction, Maricopa, the city of Maricopa? It's always very confusing, right? The city of Maricopa. So please make sure you're looking at those things and that's what you're using on those agreements. Again, you can use the show property, but please don't come into my office all upset that somebody else wrote the contract and you want to be paid. Because I'm going to look at the very top line of that and go, oh, it said agreement to show property. You didn't write the contract.
Whereas in my office, I'm much more empathetic. I keep a box of tissues and I put them to the front of the desk. And then I continue to work on my computer until you're all cried out. And I'm like, oh, sorry.
There you go. All right. All right. So, how do you make an update to the seller property disclosure statements today? So those of you that have been around a while, there used to be a little line underneath where the seller signed that said revised and initials and a date. That's gone. If you have not noticed that, that disappeared 5 years ago. It disappeared a while ago. 3 years ago. Okay, there you go.
Time flies.
Time flies. So what do you do if the seller needs to update their SPUDs? How do you help the seller to relay that information? Anybody?
Notice.
A notice disclosure form. How many of you know that there's a notice disclosure form? Mark knows. So, what's different about a notice disclosure form? Does anybody know? How many people sign the notice disclosure form? I actually didn't include it here, which I had. How many people sign it?
No.
Well, just the one party that's delivering the notice, right? But what does that notice do for the other party? What does the other party have the right to do? What does the buyer have the right to do when a seller updates the seller property disclosure statement? What are they allowed to do? What are they given? What timeline does it start all over? Would you like to answer that question?
So it starts the 5-day renewal process, response time. So the buyer has 5 days to review the information. Now,
But not on the Binzer.
no,
Oh,
on
okay,
the
okay.
seller
I just wanna
property
make sure. All right,
disclosure.
right.
Yeah, on the seller property disclosure, the buyer had, that's why it says deliver it within 3 days. So it's within the inspection period, right? So it's in the due diligence period. So if it's delivered after that, the buyer has 5 days to reject the home based upon the delivery of the seller's property disclosures. Now, if you have to update the seller's property disclosures, please understand that an update, if it's like the house got broken into, okay? For many people, it happens, it's more situational because the house was vacant. But if the home is being sold to a single mother and she becomes worried about the security in the area, and then maybe after that happens, they didn't look at the buyer crime rate statistic in the area before, but now they do. And now they feel unsafe. Can they cancel based on that?
Yes.
Absolutely. If the landscapers were there and they broke a window by a rock going through it. And you take photos of it and the seller has the window replaced. And they notify, they said the front window's been replaced because it was broken. Can a buyer cancel based on that? Probably not. Probably not. It is something that it's kind of like putting the home back in its original condition that it was at the time of contract, because that's what the contract says, right? So it's the same as if the hot water heater quits working, the seller has to replace it if it happens between the inspection period and the close of escrow, or AC, which a lot of sellers still don't understand that. And as is doesn't stop that, but understand that they still have to show it in the same condition. So if the seller says AC quit working and I made that repair, can the buyer back out? Again, I'm gonna go with probably not.
But the question is, how was the repair done? So they can't go and put a Band-Aid on it and say they fixed it.
Yeah, no,
They
it has
do
to
actually
be,
a legitimate repair.
The buyer didn't select that vendor to repair, I think.
Doesn't matter.
There's
Comes with it.
no place in the contract that says the buyer gets to choose who does the repairs.
Nope. Or what, let's say they're replacing the water heater, and as long, it was a 50-gallon hot water heater and the buyer wanted to go to a tankless, yeah, that's not the buyer's choice. The seller just has to replace what is there, right?
Now,
Right.
or they
Or-
can, you can write up an addendum, so
Sure.
like, that if the buyer did want a tankless, then they could say, hey, just give us the money that you were gonna spend and we'll put in a tankless.
Right.
Can they demand a tankless? And the answer is no.
Correct.
So, it's again, that's why it's good to let people know, because let's say the AC goes out, right? Technically, if you're putting it in the same condition, you can get a refurbished unit, right? And not a brand new unit.
Mhm.
But if you let them know saying, hey, this is what the replacement cost would be for a 14 SEER, but if they want a 16 SEER, it's this. We'll give them the credit if they want to do this, or they can help pay the contractor and then they can choose their contractor. I mean, again, getting in front of some of these issues and working cooperatively with the other agent is a lot of
The big part of it.
that's.
So actually, this came up because we did have an agent that was not ours, the buyer's agent, we represented the seller. The buyer's agent decided that the 5-day period opened up the buyer inspection notice and seller response term again, so that they could change what had been submitted. Now, the seller had already responded. So buyer had sent their request, seller had responded and was waiting for the buyer to say yes or no, we're moving forward or not. And they sent over a notice of something had been, they were clarifying something that had been a question that had been asked. And so they were giving more detail. And the buyer then said, great, we get another chance at the bucket to ask for another repair. I was like, hold on a minute. So folks, the seller property disclosure statement is under which section of the contract? Does anybody know what the header is? Do you know what section that is? Disclosures. What is the buyer inspection notice seller response under what section? Due diligence, right? So due diligence is very clear that the buyer is given one shot to ask for repairs, right? So we had an agent that was having trouble with this. Their buyer wanted to ask for things, but then wanted to be able to ask for more things later on. And we're like, you can't do that. So he says, well, I don't want to use the Binzer form.
I do too. It usually happens around Christmas time.
I know, yeah, can I have this? So.
Honey, I know I said I wanted this, but while you're out shopping,
So the thing about the inspection notice is you've got this one opportunity, right? And so this guy says, this is a buyer, he says, I don't want to use the buyer inspection notice. Well, you don't actually have to use the buyer inspection notice, but the language for that is in the contract the buyer's already signed. It's not in the Binzer that it says you only get the one shot. It's in the contract. Like the buyer has already agreed to this. So Here you go. So the seller send your buyer response to the Binzer. The buyer has the opportunity to move forward, right? Here is your whole Binzer thing. This talks about what the buyer can do, what the seller can do. This is in the contract. That's not in the Binzer. So this guy was like, I'm just going to throw the Binzer out. I don't want to use your Binzer form. It doesn't really matter. You've already signed the purchase contract. You've already agreed to these timelines, right? So again, disclosing something on your seller property disclosure is disclosures. It has its own 5-day period, and yes, the buyer can walk away and get their earnest money back. Doesn't matter where you are in the inspection period. But the inspection period is detailed and the timelines are detailed. And what is 285 to 286 says, verbal discussions. Do not change any of this, right? So Kathy, what happens on this timeline, right? My buyer writes a 10-day inspection period. And we send over to you as the seller, the Binzer on day 6. Whose time is it now on day 7?
Oh, it's the seller's. Now the seller can respond.
Wait, but I want to send, I want to correct something. Wait, I want to send something on day 9.
No redos,
Right?
no redos.
Why no redos? It's not, the buyer's done. If you think of a cube, that cube flipped. You are in somebody else's time zone, right?
Yeah. So, yeah, I think what you're running into a lot with the Binzer is, you know, what I see with Binzer mistakes are asking the seller to conduct an inspection. Like on the Binzer, the buyer will say, hey, you know, we saw this water damage. We want the seller to do mold testing. And we want them to remediate if they find any mold. Okay, that's actually an improper, the seller's not responsible for inspections. And if you run into a situation where, I don't know, let's say that the inspector can't get out there right away. Okay, which by the way, your inspections should be ordered immediately.
Mhm.
Because if things are discovered, then you can do follow-up inspections and quotes. And if the roof is bad, get a couple different roofers out there. And if they suspect mold, get some testing done. So the inspection should be as quick as you can get it once you've got a signed contract. That doesn't mean you turn in a Binzer right away.
What happens if I ask for the seller to service the air conditioner? What does that mean to a seller?
So usually for a seller, somebody says service the air conditioner. Well, it's the yearly service, right? They come out for $89. They'll hose it down. They'll, you know, clean the coils, whatever that is. Now, this is what I run into. When they're servicing, they find something is wrong. And the sellers feel like, I don't have to fix that because they just asked me to service it. That becomes a notice disclosure. So if they want to be hard-headed about it and they say, hey, the service people said that, you know, this circuit was busted, or there's a leak in the coils that we discovered as we were cleaning, or whatever it is. If they find something in the unit that's not working properly, and they report that to the seller, and the seller says, too bad, so sad they didn't ask for it, is that not a material fact that the seller now has to disclose?
It is, but you know, my buddy is an AC tech. So he's just going to go service it and get it all cleaned up. And I'm just going to get a report that says the unit is in good working order.
So you get that report. Is your buddy willing to put his license on the line when somebody else comes out and says that's a pre-existing condition that's been there for a long time? And the last service tech
Ignored it, right?
ignored it or didn't report it. Because guess what? Just like you, that's a professional license that they have. And they can get complaints filed on them. And
But he's my buddy.
if the seller thinks that their buddy's gonna put their license on the line, it's just when people ask you to do something illegal because they're friends of yours. Do you put your professional license on the line? Because it could be your brother or sister. I don't care.
Right.
You know, this is your professional license and you have a professional standard that you have to hold. And I think we all need to keep that in mind. Even if somebody has a friend that runs a business, they're not going to risk their license for you, nor should they.
But what if I just tell the AC company, all I want you to do is blow out the coils and rinse off the unit.
That's awesome, because you know what's gonna happen when the unit stops working? The first call that's gonna be made, because you have to supply what at the final walkthrough?
Receipts.
Who is the buyer gonna call? Who's the first person they're gonna call? The person who's on the receipt.
Mhm.
And who's the person on the receipt gonna say? They're gonna say, well, you have the receipt, but here's my report to them. I reported it to them. That's a non-disclosure issue by your seller, and they will be sued and they will lose.
Right. So the challenge though, when you write that, I think it comes back to a couple of things. As the seller's agent, if they haven't cleaned their air conditioner this year, maybe you get them to clean it before they list the home, right? Get the unit up and making sure it's fully working, right? But I do think as buyer's agents, it puts everybody in a bit of an issue if there's no home warranty and they ask for the unit to be serviced. To me, the question is that some part of inspections that ends up the seller is then having to do the inspection on the air conditioning unit because they're having to service, which is actually gonna open up other inspection issues. So that becomes a concern.
Is there a better way to write that language as far as like service, right? I feel like that's kind of a very, just a broad, very ambiguous, very broad stroke, like, could you get more specific or?
You can get more specific, and preferably, what is it that the buyer wants done?
Right.
So ask them, what is it, you're saying service. What does that mean to you? Okay, it sounds like, a therapist, right? Well, what does that mean to you? How do you feel about that? Sometimes you have to ask those questions. What does that mean to you?
But the challenge is if you write in there, you want the seller to have the unit inspected, that's a problem because the seller's not responsible for inspections, the buyer is.
Could bypass all the shenanigans by just getting like an inspection done, like a specific HVAC inspection?
Yes.
That would be perfect.
That's why I said, do your general inspection up front as fast as you can. And it's not unusual, depending on the age of the home.
Sure.
Is it unusual to have a roof person on hand and try to coordinate not just a general inspection, but a roof inspection, a pool inspection, an HVAC inspection? If you see, electrical panels that were done in the 50s, might you want an electrician there? Sure. Environmental. Listen, there's no home that's perfect. As a buyer's agent, if you walk in and you see things that might be an issue, point them out. Because then you can arrange for the proper inspections. I saw an inspection report with 105 things on it recently that somebody had sent to me. And basically an agent was saying, I have no idea how to write this. And I'm like, you don't, you tell your buyer to run. Not walk, run. Because,
That's
and
a
it was
lot.
a single woman. And I'm like, I'm sorry, she could be the handiest woman around. I'm pretty handy, but if I saw that inspection report, no way. No way. So sometimes the best thing to do, and she kind of got a lot of kickback because a friend of the buyers, it's always a friend, right?
Points.
A friend of
Lots
the
of those.
buyers wrote an email basically scolding the agent because he didn't warn her about all of these things that were wrong with the home. And a lot of them were hidden. A lot of them were up on the roof. And my agent was just like, per the contract here, I don't go on the roof. I don't do inspections. But sometimes we become blind to certain things because we see it in so many homes. But you have to remember that buyers, they haven't been in 1,000 or 2,000 homes. You have. So it is your responsibility to go and say, hey, there's a brown spot on the ceiling. They're looking at the gorgeous tile, but they're missing the brown spot in the ceiling. That is something we'd want to have an inspector look at. A lot of times, brown spots in the ceiling indicate some type of water. That could be roof, that could be an overflow AC pan. That could have been somebody who shook up a Coke underneath it because they have teenagers and sprayed it all over the ceiling. I don't know, but it's something we want an inspector to take a look at.
I bring a flashlight. maybe I'm a little bit overboard, but I look behind the washer and dryer, under the sink, case, deep
No.
filter. I look at all that and I take little notes. and
If
I-
you're the listing agent, absolutely.
No, I do this affecting my buyer, just to say that this might be something to consider. If I see something that.
Well, hopefully it's to consider to have the inspector look at.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
See,
I talk about the different inspectors that.
but you have to be careful there, because by doing all of that, you're almost taking on the role of an inspector. And you actually, if you miss something, they actually could come back and say, well, he gave us all this other information on all these other homes. He had a flashlight, he was digging around. And I'm just talking best practice. I know I used to go above and beyond for my clients too, but there is a fine line where acting like an inspector will make it seem like you are an inspector.
Flashlight in my vehicle.
Yeah, I mean, now, can you, this is what I used to do. Somebody's looking in an area, all the homes are generally the same age, right? So in a home of this age, these are some of the things you probably
Right.
want to pay attention to. And you can point out, a lot of most common leaks happen with the drain for the washer and dryer. So, you might want to take a look at that while we're looking at houses. Take a look at the baseboards. If you see a white chalky, that indicates probably the house may have been flooded at one point. These are all things we'd ask the inspector. Point out the fact that the pull down stairs in the garage has to have a metal flashing or something on it. You can point out that if somebody used a flexible tube on the the hot water heater with pressure release valve,
Or
that-
under the sinks.
you
I
know,
like those
that
accordions.
that you may want to have that looked at by the inspector. You
That's
can't,
what I
don't
said.
say things like that's against code. And neither should your inspector, by the way.
Well, the problem is, was it to code when the home was built? Because if the home was built in 1980, it's built to that code.
So can they make that statement? Could they say, like, because I've heard that often.
It should say it was built to code when it was, when it
I
was
am telling you, if you have an inspector that says things are against the code, especially if I represented the seller, I would say, can you produce the code book, the code and the page that's on? Because I believe there's about 6 code books and they each have about 5,000 pages in them.
But just avoid that.
So if
Well, the
an
inspector
if an
should.
inspector is quoting code, number one, that's not ASHI standards, American Home Inspector, that's not to their standard. And if they're quoting code, I would question that they deliver that code with their report. Because it does depend on when the home was built. And you can say, is that code based on what year and what book and what page
So-
and which code?
One of the issues that often comes up in this area, right, is that there are no ground fault circuit interrupters if the home was built in the 70s, 80s in the kitchen. Or if they are, they're at 6 feet from the water source. And so if it's an older home and they don't have the GFCIs, you'll see inspectors say you should have these GFCIs. Well, yes, that is a common practice, but the seller's not required
Unless,
unless there's been renovations
There you go.
that required that, yes. So if the home has been renovated, you open up that you have to pull it up rather than it's being grandfathered. But if there have not been renovations and there are no GFCIs, I mean, the buyer can ask for them, but you need to understand that the seller's in no way, shape or form obligated. That's like saying, I'd like a marble countertop. That's an upgrade. I'd like a GFCI. Okay, so would I, but
I
it's
like a
not there.
Ferrari.
You made the offer on this home. I'd like to, yeah, let's add that.
And the other thing you're starting to see on the Binzers,
Mm-hmm.
and this is what I'm seeing more and more of, out of, the North Scottsdale office. And that is, bringing back the commissions in the negotiations with the Binzer. So the seller's response, sometimes what I'm seeing is that the buyer's agent agrees to reduce their commission too. Or you're getting that phone call saying, well, the seller will do it if you reduce your commission. Okay. And again, I'm gonna go back to the original response on this, which is, why should I pay for your seller's repair? And a lot of times they'll be like, no, they're the repairs that your buyer wanted. Well, those are the repairs that my buyer would like the seller to do to complete the sale. If your seller's not interested in completing the sale, then they can say no to the repairs. I'm gonna highly suggest that you guys sit down one-on-one and just practice those responses. Because if you can't say them right off the top of your head, somewhere you're gonna go, ooh, and it's gonna cost you money. So be prepared for those answers.
So let's actually talk about the buyer inspection notice seller response. And I'm not advocating at all this whole thing about commissions or compensation, right? But who does the buyer inspection notice seller response go to after it's signed? Who does it get delivered to? The other agent, right? What about title? We have title here. Does title get a copy of the Binzer? Why does title not get a copy of the Binzer?
Because then the lender would get it.
And people are like, no, the title doesn't have to send it to the lender. I'm gonna send it to title, that it's not required. Roberta, what is in the contract instructions for title to deliver? Title is to release materials that they get to who?
Lender.
All parties. All parties. So you send something to title, they have to send it to the other parties. Period. Right? So if in your Binzer you're writing, or in lieu of, or that we want additional dollars off of the concessions, right? We want seller to pay concessions. And you send the Binzer to title, who does the Binzer then go to? The lender, okay? Now, if it's a cash deal, we can have another conversation. But if there's a lender involved, please, 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 if you have a Binzer that's asking for some type of monetary compensation, that needs to be on an addendum. Now, I've been recommending my buyers, you can write on the Binzer numbers, but I think you're better off writing in lieu of, please see addendum 1. So that if you negotiate now and have a conversation that the seller is going to contribute $3,000 towards buyer's closing costs, that can be written on an addendum. And by the way, those of you writing an addendum, title would very much appreciate if there were additional concessions at the beginning, 2% originally, and now you're adding another 1%, that you say, in addition to the original concessions of 2%, there is now a total of 3% in concessions. Seller is agreeing to add 1% to the original amount. So 1 + 2 = 3. That calculation on there is very important because title doesn't know if you're replacing what was originally asked. Right? So depending on your language matters in contracts. Isn't that funny? So if you write, seller will now only contribute 1%, guess what? That 2% that you got before is gone. So be very careful how you write that. But if you write that in the addendum, and then you guys want to go back and forth and redo the addendum 16 times before it gets signed, I don't really appreciate that, but just do that on one document. Right? If you have a lender, can you have addendum 1 that now disappears? Right, they need to see all those addendums. So does title. You can't jump addendums, right? So if on the Binzer you said seller agrees to pay, because the buyer's writing this, right? Seller agrees to pay $10,000 in buyer closing costs. And then you write the addendum and it goes back and forth and now says $6,000. I've had people come to me, well, is that 6,000 plus the 10 that's in the Binzer? Well, we need to fix the Binzer. Okay. Could you just not put it there then? Could we work on it on a different sheet? We can fix the Binzer if we have to. You can come see me in person, we'll deal with that. But would prefer just to move it onto an addendum with if it's a dollar amount, right? That's got to go to the lender. It's got to go to title. We still have a little bit of time. We have 15 minutes more. Oh, we got title. Yes, Roberta.
And on that Benzer addendum, don't say in lieu of repair.
Yeah, on the addendum should just say seller agrees to contribute an additional 1% added to the original 2% for 3% total towards buyer closing costs. No in lieu of, no nothing else there, just sellers contributing concessions.
And you need to talk to the lender, your LO, to make sure that the amount that you're negotiating is
Can be
allowable.
used.
Because you might have to negotiate a price difference, a lowering of the purchase price plus concessions.
We're
Um,
seeing that a lot.
and then the other things that can be done, that it's okay by the lender, that you'll have to go to your LO and get run through underwriting, would be a contractor being paid directly. So let's say the roof needed to be replaced and say it's 25 grand. Well, there's no loan that I know of that's gonna allow for that type of a concession, because the lender's gonna wanna know that the roof is gonna be repaired. Now, lenders will, however, allow title to pay a contractor directly from the proceeds from the seller to have the repair done. But this has to be negotiated up front, because different lenders have different, it depends on who the back, if it's Fannie, Freddie, FHA, it just depends on who the loan is with. It may be that the roof has to be done,
Prior to close.
and in which case, there are roofers out there that will take payment directly from escrow.
Done it a
But-
lot.
All of that has to be negotiated. A new roof doesn't kill a deal. You just have to keep negotiating.
So really good point. If the seller is going to pay some things out of escrow, you can do that. But guess what? It's not on an addendum, folks. Right? If the seller's doing that, hopefully the work's being done prior to close of escrow. But title will take seller instructions to make payments based on an invoice for work completed. Okay, so you can send that, but please don't put it on an invoice, because guess what? If you put, you know, the roofers being paid, underwriters going, roofer? What roof? Wait, I want to see the inspections now. And guess what? If an underwriter asks for your inspection report, can you deny that underwriter the inspection report? Not if you want the loan.
That's why it's really important to talk to your LO through all of this, because some of them have underwriters that are local. They're down the hall. They can go talk to them.
Right.
Right? Those are the best lenders, by the way. And some of them have underwriters that are in Texas. And,
Have different rules.
you know, they don't know the LO, and they're going strictly by the guidelines that are in front of them. And trust me, there are different guidelines for every loan, because every lender or lending institution will adjust guidelines to what they're willing to do. There's a certain amount of risk. There's the strict FHA guidelines. Okay, the Arizona law book, right? What are the pieces of paper required by the Arizona law book for us to have? There are very few. What do we require as a brokerage?
More.
To keep our best practices and to keep lawsuits to a minimum and to be able to best defend you and us? It's more. Lenders are the same way. They have minimal guidelines, and then they have their overrides. And so the rules change, and each lender has different rules.
Go ahead, Roberta.
And most lenders are not allowing for holdbacks, which is why you're impressing that the work needs to be complete.
Yes, so Roberta from Rock Title is saying that most lenders are not allowing escrow holdbacks. There used to be, back in the day, we could say, seller agrees to do an escrow holdback for $4,000 for carpet or flooring repairs, right? That will be invoiced after closing, and title will make the payment to XYZ flooring, right? They're not liking to do those anymore. So you need to make sure, again, like she said, talk to that LO. And then if there are seller instructions to pay bills, I once had we had a concessions, and we ran out of money to pay. we didn't have any other bills, so we knew that the plumbing or the pool filter needed to be replaced. And so I was able to buy, the buyer was able to buy through a pool company and get an invoice for the filter itself, not the installation, right? Because the work hadn't been done, but they ordered and bought the filter, which was going to be delivered the next week. We were about to close. The filter system, which is what, 354, whatever it is today. So we were able to get that invoice. The lender was fine with that. Title was able to pay the pool company, and we were able to keep those concessions on the buyer's side rather than going back to the seller. Right? Yeah.
I have a question on concessions, it might be more control, but are concessions coming out of the Windsor and also the seller compensation considered in the same bucket, what's limited to?
No,
Separate?
no.
Right,
So the question for those online was, are the seller compensation addendum, is the seller compensation to a buyer broker and the buyer concessions that the lender looks at coming from a seller as concessions the same bucket? And the answer is no. Oh, it should be coming from this one. Is that not
I don't
suggesting?
know why it's
Hold on.
filter in and out, in and out, in and out. It's driving me crazy. It's gotta be driving all you crazy.
Well, hopefully they're not watching. It's people online that are probably going nuts. I don't know why that's doing that. So it's this one
Yeah.
that's not.
I just
doing it.
thought maybe the dust, so.
No, okay.
Maybe
I
not.
just want to tell you, I'm stroke because of all that. Like.
Are you?
I
Thank
would
you.
be too.
Okay. It's probably, I could do the blur background. That might help it. So, that might, it just makes us come back and forth. No, sorry, don't do that. That was
Don't do
worse.
that.
Okay,
Yeah, two different buckets.
two different buckets, and what the seller can do, what the lender will allow are two different things. Questions from online. I know we got people here still online. We got 9 of you. Anybody want to open their mics and ask a question? Everybody's quiet. Yes.
They all went back to bed.
I got here a little late and I apologize. As far as like the expertise, right? So something that is kind of pertinent to like my business model is I work all the way down to Nogales, right? Like I have a lot of friends and family, especially in like Santa Cruz County, Pima County, Vidal County, just through that corridor. What constitutes an expert, right? Like at what point are you, within your reasonable means? I grew up, I've spent 17 years down in Santa Cruz County, very familiar with it, and as a realtor, I've done a couple of deals. But like, at what point, I guess, what's that threshold?
So I think it's where you can display reasonable competency. So if you are, let's say outside of Nogales and you're working with a buyer, okay? Somebody says, how far is the border from here and what is the likelihood of people being smuggled across the land or in this neighborhood or something like that? And a reasonable question and fear in these days. But if you can't say, I didn't know we were close to the border. And I don't know what school district we're in, and I don't know how, and of course, some people can't answer that now, but displaying reasonable care and confidence for the area. So is there, let's say, underground water? Okay. Like if you work out Rio Verde area. Okay, let's take the Rio Verde area. If you don't know about the water situation out there and you're
Right.
selling a home out there, could you be working outside of your area of expertise? Yeah, absolutely. I know people that sold land behind the Air Force Base after the government stepped in and said no more building. And they were selling lots out there. People thought they could build out there. And the answer was no, that was shut down. There are no more building permits being issued by, and I think it was actually Maricopa County put a stop to it. So if you were selling land out there, could you have been taken up for working outside your area of expertise? And the answer is yes. Okay. Where something you don't know that is prevalently known for the area, if you are not aware of it and you don't keep in touch with it, I mean, the shutting down of the land behind the Air Force Base made national news. And it certainly was on the local news stations. So not knowing that could be, you worked outside your area of expertise. Okay? So if there's things going on, all of those Santa Cruz, Nogales, all the way up that gullet, and you're not in touch by keeping track of the news down there and what's happening in the area, could that be considered working outside your area of expertise? The answer is yes. You know, you may have lived there for 17 years, but if you're not of current knowledge of something that's affecting the area, that would be prevalently known to any other agent in that area.
How many of you work the Santan Valley? Nobody here works the Santan Valley?
But-
How
So
many?
you know where the Santan Valley is?
She does too, she's listed.
I'm laughing.
She, poor person, listed a home with her. But what is one of the features or what is one of the issues for the Santan Valley that you should absolutely know about if you're selling homes in that area? Does anybody know?
Private water.
No.
Fishers.
Those neighbors.
Fissures.
Fissure map.
Sinking soil, like literally houses crumbling, right? So if you were not around selling homes, what was that 15 years ago? I don't even know when it was, 12 years ago?
Actually about,
No, it was,
no, about 10 years ago.
okay,
There was, because of
big
the
issue.
extreme drought and the amount of building that was going on out there. And they tapped into the groundwater for, a lot of the farms in the area. It
collapsed.
the fissures developed and you had like literally caverns open up.
Right. So, but if you were doing real estate down there at the time and you weren't watching what was going on and were unaware of it, it was a huge issue. But today, if you're selling something out there, do you still need to know about that? Yes, you do. And you need to say, you need to check these maps.
Do you know where the maps are?
Ooh.
Anybody know where the maps are, can be located? Ann knows.
No.
Actually,
it-
do you know who has the fissure maps and the airport maps, the military airport maps that you have to know? ADRE website.
ADRE,
Mhm.
Arizona Department of Real Estate website. So, yep.
There's public information on there. And they have it on there. If no one's ever been there, I know we all like to stay away from that website because it means trouble to us unless we're like moving our
Getting your
license or something
education,
now.
right?
But if you go there and you go to information for the public, it'll actually have a lot of that information on there.
It's a good thing to check out. You know, it's funny, you brought us right back to a circle because, you know, that ADRE website
We
that
are one.
we are one, right? Yeah. Those of you, and of course, I'm not speaking to the people here, but maybe somebody will watch this that's on my newsletter, that if you have not renewed your associations, people wonder why we spend so much time as a broker dealing with this, but it's because we don't want you to lose your license. And it's not a joke. We have to actually sever you, not us, but the office has to sever you if you do not come current on those. Each association has a different deadline, which is very
I know, it's
confusing.
ridiculous.
I told everybody January 31st, so if you didn't do it by January 31st, the office would be severing you at some point in February, which is true. At some point they will be. It's not a joke because our choice is either to sever you, pay your bill, or have our entire office shut down for that association. So our choice is not to have our offices shut down and the rest of you that are paying your bills. So thank you very much. But I always thought that was bizarre. That was the oddest thing that I learned as a managing broker was like, wait a minute, they're going to shut down the entire rest of the company because we haven't, these, 5, 10, 15, 20, 100 people haven't paid their association dues. Yes, they will. So we choose not to do that and we sever them instead. So that is why.
Yeah,
Right.
no, not
Yeah,
happening.
yeah, no, we're not doing that. Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, that doesn't
Because
happen.
then we're hounding you for a whole new reason.
Yeah, yeah.
And, yeah.
So, but just so you guys know, okay, any last minute questions? Because we're right now at 11. Yeah, Mark?
So let's say the contract says 10 days for inspection
Mm-hmm.
and the HOA docs come in on the 11th day. Okay, you can always order a rush, which is 5 days.
Yep.
And the buyer reads the HOA documents and doesn't like, for example, reserves and thinks there's gonna be an assessment to the buyer on the 11th day cancel.
So how many days do you get when you receive notifications? So if the HOA materials are not received until, let's just say day 11, how many days does the buyer have to object and or cancel if they so choose from receipt of that HOA materials?
So it's actually 5 days.
It's 5
So it's 5
days.
days.
It's kind of separate. There's no-
Totally separate.
Now-
Day, day 11.
And you have to be careful, especially when you're selling condos, which is a really good point, Mark, because a lot of times the HOA docs will be sent out by title and they're done well within the due diligence period, but still if they arrive on day 10, you still have 5 days.
Right.
But the financials sometimes don't get sent because they're more difficult to pry out of the cold dead hands of the HOA community. So that might not come until right before closing. And that is something that as a listing agent, you need to follow up on. And guess who has a much easier time of getting those documents?
The seller.
So if you're listing a condo, the seller can actually put together all the HOA information, the CCNRs, the any updates that they've done. They can put together the rules and regulations, and they can get their hands on the financials. And they can provide that directly to the buyer's agent. That's delivery. So if your seller does that up front, you remove the risk of a buyer canceling right before the close of escrow. And that is something that a lot of listing agents just don't do. The sellers don't, they never ask the sellers to do it. And then, but I guarantee you, they're going to say, why is this deal canceling 3 days before? And ultimately, we'll never admit it, but it will be your fault because it's something that you should, as a listing agent, have them do.
Okay, thanks. We are going to finish this up. We're going to, sorry for the folks online that have had the
Oh, there's the
blurry
chat.
images.
You missed
Oh,
the chat.
I missed the chat. Okay, we'll go in here. Would that addendum be delivered to the lender? Oh,
We answered the question.
Thanks,
See?
Jody.
On and off. Anytime, Jody, we're full of information.
All right, folks. So next week is our office meeting. Please come join us. We have a guest from a company called House Amp, which is very interesting, a new opportunity, a new affiliate for Realty One Group. Come learn something from this group called House Amp, which I think will be very beneficial if you've had sellers wanting to make some repairs, whether minor or major, and needed to have access to cash. It's a very cool program. So we look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great week. If you're going to the open, enjoy yourselves. Just
Oh, if you go to the open and you want to park in the lot, I'm sorry. If you are headed to the open and you want to park in the lot where the North Scottsdale office is, if you're going on the weekend, we'll leave some parking passes out on us up front. Use your key fob to the west door. You have to be in that west parking lot. You might have trouble getting there. But if you can get to that west door, get into the office, I'll have some parking passes left out that you can park in that parking lot if there is anything available. There may not be, no guarantees, but if you wanted to park there, we'll leave some parking passes out. Okay?
thank you very much. All right, folks, have a good one. We'll see you next week for our office meeting. Bye.